So it was in 1997 that Andy Green set the land speed record of 763.035 miles per hour. It was then in 2009 that the Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt set the world record in the 100-metre sprint of 9.58 seconds. Little slower than Andy Green, to be fair, but that means that Bolt's speed averaged 10.44 metres per second. So he was going, on average, 23.43 miles per hour as he was running. Then in 2018, the Kenyan Eliud Kipchoge, he set the world's fastest marathon time of 2 hours, 1 minute and 39 seconds. Yeah, a bit longer than Bolt took to do his 100 metres, to be fair. But on average, he was covering 100 metres every 17.08 seconds. He had to travel at an average speed of 13.1 miles per hour to do that. Reflect on this. As a human race, we are obsessed with going ever faster. Or as Maverick would put it, I feel the need for speed. Yes. Now, John Mark Comer, he says a whole load of stuff in the final chapter of his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, directly on the topic of slowing. And he actually offers some really practical advice. Some great kind of hints and tips and things that we could do. As I said though at the start of this series, the aim was not to simply regurgitate his book. And so I'm not actually going to share any of the 20 practical pieces of he gives in terms of how you could slow the pace of your life. I want to encourage you still to read the book. If you want to borrow it, if you can't get yourself a copy, do please get in touch. For those of you who have read it or are reading it though, I do just want to say that I did try number 7 on his list of 20, and specifically bullet point 8. It's a great idea, it just didn't really work for me, but a lot of this is about giving it a go. Emma's going to remind you later on again about the life lessons that we're trying to gather in terms of different ideas that people have tried or things that haven't worked and how we can learn from one another. And part of this is exploring what it looked like for us as we endeavour to, ruthlessly eliminate hurry from our lives. And instead, I want this morning to turn to a passage in Luke and consider perhaps an obvious story as we think about slowing, Luke 10, but taking a look at what is going on here and asking the question, where might we see ourselves within it, but also reflect, what does it actually mean as disciples to really take hold of this challenge, really, to slow down in our lives. So I'm going to read from Luke 10 and verses 38 to 42. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you're worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." I've shared before how often when I watch a movie and the credits are rolling, the question I want to be asking is, okay, what happens next? I want to see another 5 minutes. I want to see the next stage of things worked out. Okay, so the couple have got together, but do they stay together? And where do they live? And what does it look like? Or, okay, he's got that job, but does it last? Or is it just that fleeting moment? And I have the same question as I read this passage here of Mary and Martha. In many respects, did anything change? We see a snapshot here. But I wonder, what the next 5 minutes held, or the next day, or the next week, the next time someone was invited in to their home. You know, if Emma and I were to invite people round for dinner, I'd like to think that I'd offer some sort of help, or at least I'd show a willingness in terms of the preparations of ensuring everything is ready, playing my part in getting the proceedings ready. Now, it's slightly fallen down this morning because Emma was due to be down at the Emmanuel Centre sharing about Renew. They're not meeting today, so she's going to have to go another point. So you will actually be able to ask Emma afterwards whether I do help or not. Whether I am any use, or really I just kind of, fill the space and that sort of thing. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? As we read this passage from Luke, the likelihood is that although it's not explicitly mentioned, this is Mary and Martha, sisters of Lazarus, good friends of Jesus. We read about them in John 11. He comes to their village on his way to Jerusalem. And it's so easy, I think, to kind of caricature this passage, this account, to kind of, go to the two extremes of what we're seeing and what is going on. Jesus, he comes in, he starts to speak and starts to share, and Mary, she comes and sits by his feet, and she's lapping up every word that he has to say. Her attention, her focus is totally on him. Sister Martha, mind you, she's busy preparing, getting things ready. Was this the food? Was this kind of just the general hospitality? Whatever, though, it's of great importance to her. And you might be able to sense this hustle and this bustle and kind of, the steam rising, whether from her or just from the kitchen area. Yeah, she sees her sister without a care in the world, so to speak, for what needs to be done. To the point that Martha actually comes in and raises this with Jesus. She doesn't even kind of seem to talk to her sister about it. Bypassing her, she speaks almost at Jesus with a sense of, don't you see what is going on here? How are you allowing this? Come on, do something about this. There is a wrong here that needs to be righted. And the phrase sitting at one's feet it's a classic description of a rabbinic disciple. Mary was doing what a model disciple in Judaism would do. The Greek imperfect tense of hearing in verse 39 apparently means that Mary is absorbing Jesus' words. Again, she's taking in everything he is saying. She doesn't want to miss a single thing. And on the other hand, we mustn't miss the fact that Martha's aggravation here in this circumstance is actually, it's understandable to some extent. We're told she was distracted by the preparations. In Near Eastern culture, then as is now, that was, a considerable obligation. Ahead of this summer's trip to the Holy Land that a group of us are going on. Next month, I'm heading out there with my dad for a week. As an aside, there's still space on the summer trip if you're interested. I've got the itinerary through from Michael now, kind of outlining what we'll be doing, where we'll be going, the various places and that sort of thing. So if you're interested, do please have a chat to maybe someone who's been before or to myself. But in March, when I go next month, it'll be the third time that I've had the privilege of going. And I'm sure, just as in the previous occasions that I've been, I will be blown away and challenged by the level of hospitality that is offered. The way they go out of their way. And even, if you go into kind of the shops or you see people, there's this demonstration of hospitality that is just part and parcel of their culture. So surely we might think, well, Martha was doing the right thing, wasn't she? Again, there's this danger, though, that we can caricature the image, and we can, whichever way we look at it, we can kind of paint it as a very black and white situation. There is right, there is wrong, and we can draw our conclusions as to what should have been done or what wasn't being done. What we have here, though, I believe, is a case for slowing. I typed the words, why slow down, into Google the other day, and it produced some 8,490 million results. Don't worry, I didn't waste my time. Look, hardly any of them. But that was, just from those three words. Why slow down? Mary is slowed. Read in verse 41 and 42. Jesus tells her sister Martha, 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 the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Mary has slowed, and she has chosen the one thing that is needed. The reference here is undoubtedly spiritual, to hear the teachings of Jesus. And this is important where, as always, we look at the context of what is going on here. Taken out of context, this passage could let me off the hook from ever helping again at home. Even I think that would be a bit of a stretch, though. Or alternatively, it could lead us to think, well, obviously we need to get rid of all the chairs. It's all about sitting on the floor, isn't it? And next week you might turn up and we've got rid of them all because we read this passage and we've obviously assumed that's what it's saying. There's a real danger. Both of those are wrong. So Emma can kind of breathe easy that I'm going to continue to help at home, assuming I do. And there will be chairs here as we gather next week. At its heart, though, we see this example of an individual whose focus is on Jesus. And her actions, they enable her to hear all that he has to say. She's made the choice to prioritize her discipleship, her following of Jesus above everything else. Thing is, though, without getting kind of caught up or bogged down in wordplay, I believe, there is, and this is a case for us to slow, but slowing, not stopping. From the outset of this series, and the phrase that I used was, it's about doing less. It's not about doing less, it's about being more. And David explored this further last week as he reflected on the third practice John Mark Comer suggests in terms of simplicity. The thing is, though, for me, practically, this doesn't always mean stopping. Doesn't always mean I've got to physically stand still. That's the only way that I can remove hurry. I can spend my time in the presence with my focus on Jesus. This last week, as Emma mentioned, we were down in Cornwall as a family for the half term. And just as an aside, a massive thank you for everyone's concern for us. I think Cornwall got away with the weather, but we were inundated with comments from people. But on Wednesday morning, just to show where the weather was at, I headed out for a run, and I tried to get in one coastal run when we're down there. So I ran from Portreath, where we were staying, along to Porthtowan and back. It's about 7.5 miles. And as I climbed out of the village that we stay in, to begin with, and I reached the height of the coastal path, as I often do at this point, I just stopped and I just looked out, and I just love this moment where I just can see the kind of the horizon, if you will, the sea meeting the sky, and I could kind of feel the wind. It wasn't gale force at that point, but you're standing there. I just took a breath, and in that moment, it's just where I just connect with God in a powerful way. Now, for me, that slowing then meant I carried on running. My point is, even though I did another 7 miles and a few kind of 100 feet of elevation, all that sort of stuff, for me, that was an amazing time I spent for that hour and a half with God in his presence. The point is, it's not about doing less, it's about being more. And as I've said time and time, and the others who've preached as part of this series have said, it's going to look different for each of us. The important thing is that we work out what it does look like for us. Now, as I read this passage in Luke 10, what made me feel slightly uncomfortable, if I'm honest, is that it could be easy to take this as a rationale to, well, let's just ease off a bit, to the point that we stop. And maybe there's some who actually you've eased off to the point that you've stopped where your relationship with Jesus is. Maybe it looks good. Maybe we turn up to things and we're there physically, but actually we've slowed down and other things have crowded in. And it's actually going, how do we make sure that our focus is clearly on Jesus in all things? You know, the heart of this series, the tagline of the book, how to stay emotionally healthy and spiritually alive in the chaos of the modern world. You know, we need to ensure at all costs that our focus is on Jesus and that we're modeling what it means to follow him. It was James Edwards. He points out that the repetition of Martha's name in verse 41 conveys Jesus' affection for, his understanding for her predicament. He goes on to say, Jesus doesn't condemn Martha's hospitality, but directs her to a new understanding and employment of it in light of the gospel. Fred Craddock, he says, if we censor Martha too harshly, she may abandon serving altogether. And if we commend Mary too profusely, she may sit there forever. There is a time to go and do. There is a time to listen and reflect. Knowing which and when is a matter of spiritual discernment. In a world of ever-increasing speed, where busy is so often suggested as equaling good, we need to keep our focus on the Lord. We need to make sure our actions enable us to hear his voice. We need to choose to prioritize our discipleship, our following of Jesus above all else. In other words, I guess there's two questions that I'd want to pose and leave us with this morning. Firstly, who is our pace setter in life? Who is it that actually is guiding us and we're following and who is setting our pace? Michael Wilcock, he says, when Jesus expects us to follow him all the way, he means not in a frenzy of religious activity undertaken in our own strength, but the total abandonment of ourselves to him, for him to work in us both to will and to work for his good pleasure. Who is our pace setter? And the second question is, what does that look like for you then? How are you going to take this forward? How are you going to ensure that actually you continue to live an emotionally healthy and spiritually alive life? You know, it's in Psalm 127 where it says in the first two verses, unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Yeah, to me, this book from John Mark Comer is a call to, well, let's not just kick back, relax, and do nothing. It's a reminder, though, also that we weren't created to be run ragged, to be burnt out, to be exhausted as we journey through life. As I referenced a few weeks ago in the newsletter, as a leadership, we've been reading the book Scattered Servants by Alan Scott, the subtitle, Unleashing the Church to Bring Life to the City. You know, my prayer, one of the things that I hooked on that tree back on the 2nd of January, if you were with us, for us this year, is that God will bring lasting change to this community and that we will see that beginning this year. That we will see, you know, in the streets and the neighborhoods where we live, lives being transformed because God is on the move. Not because of some idea that I or anyone else has came up with, not because of some book that someone's written that sounds really good, but because it's God's heart to see lives change, to see lives transformed. You know, it's the mission that is outlined in his word, the greatest book ever written. That's going to require some effort from us, though. It's going to require some fresh engagement, probably some hard graft along the way. But we need to remember that there's that balance, that God doesn't want us to be wearied and burdened, That's not how he created us to be. It's asking that question, what has God got before us? How can we keep pace with him? And how can we be a part of all that he is going to do? Let me pray. God, I thank you for all that you have been saying to us over the last few weeks as we've explored this topic. I thank you for the way that you have already begun to inspire and challenge people, and I pray that you will continue to move and work by your Spirit within us, Lord. I pray that you will continue to expand our vision for what is ahead, but also remind us that you don't want us to be run ragged and burnt out as your creation. Grant us wisdom, Lord, as we seek to do all that you are calling us to, as we seek to be a part of lives being transformed in this place and beyond. Amen.